third reliance, one should rely on the discourses of explicit meaning and not on the discourses of implicit meaning. The discourses delivered by the Buddha, discourses on the Dharma, and there are numerous, 84,000 teachings or methods. In some cases, their meaning is quite obvious. In some cases, some interpretation is needed. For example, in the Dhammapada, verse 5 says, hatred never ceases by hatred, it ceases only by loving kindness. So this is easy to understand. There's no interpretation needed. It does not seem open to any misinterpretation. It's very clear that you cannot use hatred to eliminate hatred. You can only eliminate hatred by loving kindness. But in another verse, verse 294, it says, having killed mother and father, the Brahmana goes blameless. This verse needs to be interpreted, otherwise it can definitely lead to misunderstanding. Here, mother represents craving, father represents ignorance. So they are called mother and father because they are the root of the samsara, the root of the cycle of life and death, 生死轮回, 生tử輪迴. And it is the root of conditioned existence. So to cut this root is to put an end to samsara. That is why one who kills mother and father goes blameless, because he's no longer subjected to the suffering in the cycle of life and death. So these two kinds of discourse, one requires interpretation, the other one does not. In other words, one has explicit meaning, meaning you can see very clearly. The other one is implicit meaning, you require interpretations to understand the implicit meaning. One should rely on discourses of explicit meaning, not on discourses of implicit meaning. Because the meaning of the former is clear, obvious, and unambiguous, needing no interpretation. So we should understand this a little bit more because the English translation is not too clear. When you say not rely on implicit meaning doesn't mean that we should reject the discourses with implicit meaning. That's not what it means. When we look at a Chinese translation, I think it makes it clear that we should understand the meaning of the sutras and not based on misinterpretation of the sutras. So when we say do not rely on the discourses with implicit meaning, it doesn't mean to ignore the text with implicit meaning. So what's important here is to understand the meanings of the sutras and not to go by misinterpretation. The implicit meaning should be interpreted in accordance with discourses of explicit meaning, meaning it requires explanation, it requires proper interpretations. So your interpretations can be fanciful and far-fetched as you like, and you can bring out all sorts of strange, unexpected, and outlandish ideas and examples, but one should not contradict the discourses of explicit meaning. So this is still not very clear. To simply put, if we want to bring out the implicit meaning to be in accordance with the third reliance, right? We bring out the implicit meaning to be more explicit, we should not misinterpret its meaning. What does that mean? It means that whatever that we interpret in the sutra, we must not contradict conditionality. For example, to avoid seeing things as permanent and changing, like the true nature, for example. The true nature is not a thing, it's not a fixed, permanent thing. It's an improper idea to believe that there is something that is fixed and unchanging. Or it is improper to think, and it is inconsistent with conditionality to think or to say, this is my karma, there's nothing I can do about my current situation. So that's not consistent with conditionality. While the past cannot be changed, the future can change. To accept your karma, it just half the story, half the truth. The full truth is that you can still do something about the future. You can stop reacting to the negative situations with unskillful deeds. You can respond to it skillfully with awareness. So the proper thinking here is to understand that everything is under the influence of the past karma, the present volition, your intent, and the environment. Those three factors make up the overall influence. If you have this strong volition, your strong intentions, and you're in a very positive environment, you can overcome the effect of the past karma. Another proper thinking is that change is conditional. It can either be worse or better. Without change, without impermanence, there is no hope for spiritual liberation. Without change, future is very bleak, very sad, because we will be permanently stuck as dissatisfied mundane beings in the samsara. There is no hope for us to achieve spiritual liberation. The third reliance is understanding the meaning of the sutras and avoid misinterpretation of the sutras. And the misinterpretation is anything that is not consistent with conditionality. To believe that there is something that is permanent, unchanging. In the sutras, there are explicit meaning and implicit meaning. Implicit meaning requires interpretations, but the interpretation has to be proper. And again, we use the sounding board of conditionality to judge whether that is proper or not.